types of e-learning courses that suit social enterprises, everything from governance through to your marketing, social enterprise, GDPR, and all the rest of it. So it's an important tool that we use to help organizations with compliance. The second platform we have is BoardPass 365. So we designed this as a central online control panel for non-profit boards and committees where they can store all of their documents, figure out how to put their agendas together, use the apps to do that, and for their minutes. And there's also an e-learning program in there as well. So from the tech side of things, we're big into the e-learning. We got into that very early. From the social enterprise support side specifically as well, do a lot of work on business coaching, and that's where the concept for today's talk has come from. And I suppose I like focusing on the traded income side of things with enterprises, because I find that that's where the greatest demand or need arises. So between the e-learning, the online platforms, the business coaching, and the training that we do, and we do this all over Ireland. I suppose over the last 7 years, I've gotten a pretty good sense of where the sector is at, and specifically around the social enterprise space.
Well, we are delighted to have you here today. So we're going to have you maybe talk about putting the enterprise into social enterprises. You say years of experience gone into that, and hopefully it'll open up some other conversations. But these are about, even if you're an established social enterprise or if you're a pre-startup, these are all still valuable things to maybe consider and have a plan around. So I really appreciate that. So for the next 15 minutes, I think you've got control of the screen. So if you want to take us through that, I'll be harsh on time. We'll try and make sure that we get people away. People are giving up their lunch hour. So if it would be good, if you have any questions, again, please do put it in the chat box, and we'd be more than happy to chat about that. And without further ado, Caroline, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just having a slight problem moving the screen. So maybe if you...
you tell me. I got you started. Technology can be a problem in this.
Don't worry, we're in business. So what I'd like to look at for a few minutes are the 5 different elements that are important to you to get right if you're going to try and maximize the traded income in your social enterprise. And to, I suppose, put this in context for us all, I'm going to use an example of a made-up potential community centre, so you can see where I'm coming from on this. Now, given that I have a background originally in marketing and business development, you won't be too surprised that I'm using some of the jargon, but bear with me on this. The first thing you're going to have to figure out is what problem you're actually solving for that beneficiary group out there, or that marketplace, or that community that you're trying to serve. So there's 4 questions you're going to be asking and answering. The first is, who are you solving the problem for? For how many people is it a problem? For how long? In other words, is this a sustainable issue that has to be addressed? And possibly for me, the most important question of all when we're looking at traded income is the price point versus the pain point. So let me give you the example of a community centre. I work with groups all over the country, and every now and again, I'll meet a potential community and voluntary group looking at possibly forming as a social enterprise. And if we take an example now of Community X, and they say to themselves, we've got this derelict building on the edge of the village, and it's got about half an acre of ground around it. It's an absolute eyesore, and we want to do something about this. So when I ask them, what is the problem you're solving? They say to me, well, that's an easy question to answer. We've got a derelict building and wasted ground. We want to do something with it. But I say to them, that's not your problem. That's not what you're solving. What you're actually solving is what you do with the building once it's up and operational. So the easy part, if there is such a thing in social enterprise, is getting access to capital to renovate that old building and to maybe create a small community garden around this. The big drama and dilemma that faces many social enterprises is, how do you find the operating capital to run the operation after that point? So this is where we have to figure out what the problem is. Now, if you're focusing very much on what the community actually needs, you're going to see whether or not for them not having access to that community space and garden is worth spending time and support and getting behind the initiative. If for them it's not a pain point because they have other options in maybe other villages around them, you're going to find it more difficult to get them to support you. So don't make an assumption ever when you're putting a social enterprise in place, that because as like what you think is a need, people will automatically come and support you. In the old days of tech, in the early noughties, there was this phrase that went around that if you build it, people will come. That's not necessarily the case. So the first thing we have to identify is, have you figured out what the problem is for the community that they're prepared to pay to support you in putting a solution in place? So that's step number one, figuring out what the actual problem is that you're solving. So if I can just move it on to the next slide, Chris. There we go. There we go. So the second thing we're looking at, that being the case then, once you've figured out what problem is that you're solving, you're next going to have to decide how you're putting the solution into the market. So it's frequently called a business model. For any of you that have been involved in startups in the past, you may have looked at a template called a business model canvas, where it's getting you to identify all of the key factors that impact on the solution. So what I would say to you there is, again, if you don't like the jargon, think about the way you're configuring the solution. So again, let's look at this make-believe community centre that will be put in place to convert this whole building into a usable space. And I suppose the first thing they're going to have to look at then is assuming that there are sufficient demands for the need for that space. You know, what will their opening hours be? If this is going to be a voluntary run operation only, then do they have enough volunteers to cover the opening hours? What kind of skills will be required? Do they need anchor tenants, for example? So do they need organisations to come in and avail of the space? So what you're trying to do with the type of operational configuration that you will have is to identify where is the revenue coming from, and that'll be absolutely critical. And again, if you have figured out where the pain point is, then you'll figure out how much each of these different groups or individuals are prepared to pay in order to avail of the service that you're going to put into the marketplace. So your customer base is important, figuring out who the different groups are, how much they're prepared to pay, and therefore what the level of trading income is likely to be in your case. You'll also take a look as well then whether or not you need other collaborators to assist you. Do you need other community groups to come in and support and take, if you like, part of the problem away for you as well? So using this kind of a business model canvas or breaking it down into different factors, what you're trying to identify is what may impact on your ability to deliver this solution into the market effectively. And it's also giving you a sense then whether or not you have a viable solution that's worth paying for. So from a business model point of view, there'll be lots of different factors you're looking at that'll impact on your activities and so forth. So that's, again, the related to. Okay, we'll move on to the next one, Chris. Now, this is one of my favorite ones. When I started out many years ago, there's lots of grey hair in under here, and I did a course for postgrad students on how to start a business. And so I gave them chapter and verse according to the textbook. And after the second lecture, a very polite young man came up to me and he said, you know, I've been talking to my father about what we're doing in this class. And he said to me, there's only one thing you need to be successful in business in Ireland, and that's good contacts. Now, I have to say that I agreed with him. Obviously, I wasn't going to undermine his father, but I said, well, in addition to that, you would need a few other things that you have to consider. But his father was correct in that sometimes it's who you know, not what you know, that can be important. Now, that's not taking away from what we need to do to make a social enterprise successful. But I would say to you, there are 4 questions you're going to have to answer when you're identifying who you need to reach out to help you grow your enterprise. So if you are focused on your local community, which our fictional community centre may be doing, you're going to have to put together a list for yourselves as a committee and as a board of who do you know at the moment. Now, what I would say to you here is that non-profit boards in Ireland can do more in what we'll call mining their social capital. In other words, your committee members all know people, and so they need to be thinking about who do they know and who can they reach out to help support the non-profit and the social enterprise whose boards they sit on. So who do you know, and who in your community are influencers? Now, don't get thrown by people's job titles or what they do for a living or the professional backgrounds. There are people in all of our communities who are very well liked, who themselves have a very healthy level of social capital that they bring to any equation. So if they get behind you and what you're trying to do, they can swing the silent majority. Now, the silent majority, as you know, in communications, is when you're trying to develop a new initiative, and this community facility would be, you'll find that 5 to 10% of people will always oppose you, but you'll get 15% of people who will always support you anyway, because they get what you're trying to do. Really, the key is to swing the silent majority. This is where your influencers are going to help you, because by virtue of supporting you, they bring a lot of people along with them as well. Your next question then will be, how are you going to reach people? And the key here again is, if you've got board members, committee members, they have personal contacts with the individuals that you need to know. They need to formally be reaching out to them and encouraging them to get behind you. Now, the fourth question, and for me, this is a critical one. It's very important when you're growing your social enterprise that you don't use people. There's a difference in reaching out and using people. So if you are going to encourage people to build up a working relationship with you, there needs to be something in it for them as well. And you need to be mindful of that when you're talking to them. So, you know, it's all about sharing. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about social enterprise in Ireland, that we're very inclined to do that. So again, just to be mindful of it, your 4 key questions you're asking when you're considering who can help you in what you're trying to do, how are you going to reach them, and what's in it for them. Okay, Chris, we'll go to the 4th key point. Now, you all know about cash flow, and you know we can't operate without it. So again, maybe 4 points that are worth considering as you grow the enterprise here. The first is that all of us have to have cash flow projections, and if COVID-19 taught us anything, it's that. So in order for you to put together a comprehensive cash flow projection for this new community centre type concept, then you're going to have to work out obviously where the revenue is coming from, but you'll have to have a very good handle on your costs. So having a budget will help you. Now, rule of thumb in business, as you know, is that when you're starting a new initiative and you don't have a background in it, probably your budgeting and your cash flow projections are likely to be accurate for about the first 6 months, because you're trying to get a feel, an intuitive understanding of how money is coming in. How we think it will come in when we're getting our social enterprise started usually doesn't transfer it into reality. And then when you've got about a year under your belt as an enterprise, then it's possible thereafter to have more accurate budgets in place. But if you take anything away from the session today, please, encourage your committees and the groups that you work with in your enterprises to sign off on an annual budget in advance, and then use your cash flow projections around that. Because if you're finding that through we'll say 6 or 7 months into the future, you're likely to have a cash flow problem, it gives you breathing space to figure out how to fill that gap, whether through putting in a new drive to get more customers and clients into your enterprise, or possibly having to put a fundraising drive together. But at least you've got a heads up that this is something that you're going to need to take a look at. The third thing that you see in here, the role of reserves. Now, I'm sure some of you are out there thinking, oh, well, wouldn't this just be lovely if we could have reserves? But actually, in a social enterprise, we do have to plan for them, I think, right from the get-go. So you'll be building reserves over time. It's not a magic wand that you can wave around. And I say that in all its seriousness, but have a reserve, because it'll stand to you in time. The other thing I would say to you as well, as a social enterprise with clients, particularly clients that you're invoicing, remember to put your statements of accounts together on a monthly basis. Somebody has to follow up with the clients if they're not paying their bills on time. So forgive me in terms of the nuts and bolts with all of this, but this is another important factor. So on the cash flow, if you're following up clients where necessary, then hopefully it's impacting positively on the bottom line. So Chris, we'll have the final slide now. You'll be delighted to hear, and possibly for me, this is the most important one. It's the team of people making it all happen. So just a few pointers to consider here as well. You know, it's a given that you need the right people in the right roles at the right time. And initially in this fictional community centre that we're trying to create as a social enterprise, it's likely to be the board members doing the bulk of the work with some assistance from the volunteers. And at some point, they're going to say to themselves, there's a limit to what we can do. So we now need to hire our first employee. That choice of first employee is absolutely critical. If you get it right, they're going to make your lives so much easier. If you get it wrong, the opposite is the case. And you'll end up spending way too much time trying to deal with the aftermath of all of this. So you need a very clear sense as to who you need in that pivotal role for the very first employee. And they in turn, particularly if they're in a management function, will put a team of people around them that will get you the best product out into your community at the right time. Now, can I say that if the centre is being run initially by people at board level, so they are what we'll call the initial social entrepreneurs, the next thing you're going to have to figure is, as they step back, who then becomes the intrapreneur? So an intrapreneur, if you like, is that person with the drive to develop your business, but they're typically working in your social enterprise or possibly sitting on your committee. So just be mindful of that. To keep on growing the capacity of the social enterprise, you'll need someone in the intrapreneurial capacity as well. And if you have, just my final point now, if you have an intrapreneur, then as the board step back, there's no reason for them not to let go of the reins. The initial founding members of this community facility set up as a social enterprise can step down and be happy to do so. So we don't need to see founder syndrome kicking in where they try and hold on because they're worried that if they're not there, things won't be done the way that they could be. So that in a nutshell, and I hope my apologies, I've just gone over the 15 minutes of it, but in a nutshell, if you get those 5 things right, there's every chance that you will build a sustainable social enterprise. Okay, Chris?
That is not your last slide though, there is more.
Oh, well, that's true, that's true. This is the sales pitch, thanks Chris. If any of you want to reach us in Cramden Tech, I've popped up the 3 main websites we use, so our contact details are there. Drop us a line at buildfutureskills.com, which is our e-learning platform, cramdentechsolutions.com, which is our governance platform, BoardPass 365, or our training website is boardpass.ie. There we go.
Caroline, well, I really appreciate that and thank you so much. But anybody who's on the call, if you've got any questions just for Caroline or wealth of experience, just ask it in the chat. Caroline, I've taken a full page of notes, and what I'm struck by is a couple of things. One of them is that none of this is complicated. Like, a lot of it is straightforward, right? I mean, that's part of the issue, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, and the also thing as well is, like, there's a huge part on planning and being able to plan forward, but also getting out there and doing it and not be beholden by the fact that your business plan is not perfect. There's a fine balance there, right?
Oh, there is. But the key with business plans is that if you are waiting for the moment when you will create the absolutely perfect business plan, you will never get started. It doesn't work that way. And I think it's because intuitively, you learn the more that you go out into your marketplace, the more you talk to your clients, the more you talk to your beneficiaries, you're constantly looking for new ways to deliver service. And this lovely idea in business where you pivot. So in other words, you went out originally with one idea as to what you thought the market needed, and then actually in talking to them, you discover there's something else that they need. So you shouldn't be shackled by business plans. They're there to guide us, absolutely. But you know, if you even look at where the concept of a business model canvas came from, it was because a lot of high performance startups put the plans in place and they were on the shelf. They didn't work for them. So they had to go back to the beginning, and putting a business model canvas in place first, actually, because it forces you out to talk to people, to test your ideas. Doing that first is a great idea before you formally get into the process of writing the plans themselves.
Really, really good advice. If for anybody who doesn't know business model canvas, or perhaps anybody who doesn't necessarily know anything about pain points or all that sort of stuff, there are resources. Again, if you have any questions, that's what we're here for. More than happy to be able to answer those. And I know Caroline has said that she would like to follow up with anybody that has further questions. Gavin, can you speak about any experience or process and determine your price versus pain point?
Yep.
So, is it trial and error or research based?
No, it's research based. So Gavin, what I would say to you is you need to look at all of the potential clients or beneficiaries of the service, and what you're saying, you're going to segment them. And so as you identify how much they need your service, technically, the more people need your service, the more inclined they are to pay for it, because the more value they place on it. The other side that we have to look at, though, for some of your social enterprises, your beneficiaries have a limited amount of disposable income available to them. So it's not a case of charging them the maximum amount possible. They may not be able to pay it. So what you're trying to do in a social enterprise then is you've got a mix of clients. In business, we talk about the Pareto rule, that 80% of your profits will come from 20% of your customers. So again, what you'd be looking at, if I use the community centre as a made-up model for us, that centre would be going out and would be looking for anchor tenants who had a budget available to them, and what they really needed was good quality space to go into. So you'd be maximising your profit there, and you'd make sure you charged as much as the market will bear. And what you'd be using there is how much would these anchor tenants have to pay were they taking office space somewhere else. And there's plenty of information you could find to set the bar. Whereas you'd be looking at maybe some of your small voluntary groups who had absolutely no budgets, no core funding, were pressed to fundraise at all, and so you'd be setting special rates for them. So Gavin, to answer your question, what you're trying to do there is get the right mix of clients, some that can really pay the maximum the market will bear for what you offer, have a sufficient mix of them to facilitate then you being able to provide the space to a group of people that have less income. So it's not trial and error, and that's why it's absolutely key that you've gone out and you've researched the market to begin with, and you've figured out what's the maximum amount of people out there who may be able to avail of what you're putting in place. That's the other reason why you sometimes see, if in this fictional scenario where corporate clients coming in to use facilities are charged a much higher rate, and they know that they're doing this and they're happy to do it because they can afford to, so that community and voluntary participants get services at a much lower level.
No, that's really good, and thanks, Gavin. I know that you said that's helpful to you, and you're right. It's such a difficult thing for social enterprises to have the enterprise piece, which is about price and product and place promotion, but particularly price. It can be such a difficult thing to know where to pinpoint. You can kind of identify, but you still don't know how much you charge. And there's two sides to that, right? You got to figure out what your costs are and need to figure out how much they can afford, and then you also need to figure out what value they're getting. There's no point in saying that my costs are, 150k a year, and therefore I'm going to have to charge extra for anybody who comes in. It's quite a tricky thing for people to start out on, isn't it?
It is, and I suppose the other thing I would add to that as well, Chris, though, is we shouldn't be afraid to charge for products and services. So again, what is the alternative if we're not there and people really need what it is we deliver? That's a worse scenario for them to be in with, or to be in a place with. So also, when you're putting your products and services into the market, you've got to consider the value that people attach to them. And if people want quality, then oftentimes they're prepared to pay for it. So it's not just any old product for the sake of filling a space. You're not doing that either. So, quality has a price attached to it.
As we know, some of the social enterprises provide premium products, and they do sell at a premium, and that's a really good thing. And while we might have budget stuff for somewhere in the value in the middle, but we certainly do have the full range in social enterprise. Yep. Thank you so much. There's a topic that I think pricing is something that we're going to have to do more on. I think that is the thing that keeps coming back up again. Might even get you back, Caroline. I've got a second from Caroline O'Shaughnessy, Thomas Congal. My social enterprise is at idea stage. Is it a good idea to have a steering committee, and how do I know I am getting the right people on the committee? Before you answer that, Caroline, we are thinking about doing a follow-up presentation with you on boards as well, so that might be something good. But if you could just answer that question, is it a good idea to have a steering committee, and how do I know I'm getting the right people?
Okay, the first thing that I would say to you, Caroline, on that is you need to put a steering committee together. I think that makes perfect sense. You're heading in the right direction with it. But what I would look for in that steering committee are people who have experience of setting up enterprises themselves, or that they're in a business development role in a meaningful capacity. So that's the first thing. So the bottom line is you're driven by a need to solve a social problem anyway. So if you've got that passion and that commitment, you know why you're putting the group in place. What you want in the steering committee are people to ask the hard questions, and if they have the necessary experience, they're able to do that. And also that steering committee themselves might be bringing some social capital along with them, so they'll open doors for you. There'll be people you'll want to speak to. You'll be reaching to other types of organisations who might be similar in terms of what you're putting in place. So from a business development point of view, and I am really stressing the business development enterprise side today deliberately, you need a group of people who have been there before, not necessarily in the social enterprise space, but it is helpful if you include within that steering group at least one person who has a social enterprise background, because you don't just transfer the way things are done in commercial business into the non-profit sector. You know, there's a different dynamic that can arise. But in terms of your steering group, I'd expect to see an entrepreneur in there. I'd expect to see somebody with maybe a marketing communications background to help you as well, because they'll get you thinking about how you're going to put this product service out into your market, and you're going to need somebody with a social, I suppose, understanding the social cause that you're trying to address. In addition to that, I'd also have somebody from a finance background, because they'll really interrogate you then in terms of the nuts and bolts. You know, the expenses have to be paid, the capital has to be found to get the enterprise off the ground. So I think a heavy, in the initial steering committee stage, I think having a strong business element coming through strongly would be important. And obviously all of that wrapped up in an understanding of why you're trying to do this for the community or beneficiaries that you're trying to serve.
That is great. Thanks, Caroline. Again, you know, we're only touching on an awful lot of subjects, and I realize that these things can be quite meaningful, and there's very specific things that go on for different people. So if there's follow-up or whatever, please do reach out. We're here to serve. We're here to help social enterprise. It does raise a question, though, which I was thinking about when you were talking, which is, what when you don't have the skills? Do you know, when you were saying there about maybe the pre-budgeting and all those other things, you know, all the things that, you know, you'd like to have, but you're scared of or whatever, and so you end up doing the things that you know. What do you say for people that don't have those skill sets or don't even know that they need those skill sets? Go find out. What do you do?
There's two things there. If those skills are left unanswered, there's every chance your social enterprise will fail. And it happens in business, and we know that in technically or in theory, whatever the stats tell us, half of all startups in the commercial world die within 5 years of startup, and there's a reason for that. There's lots of reasons. The one thing I would say, if at all possible, to a social enterprise is, if you need a certain skill set, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, if possible, you're going to have to pay for that. And it may be necessary for you to consider whom you're employing, or it may be that you're going to bring suppliers in to fill that gap. But if there is a core or a necessary skill set and it's not addressed, then it's just a matter of time eventually until it fails. And this is also, and particularly with social enterprise, because there's going to be a big element of what you're focusing on around traded income. You don't have a choice in the matter. There's a certain set of skills that are required. So this is where the planning comes in, that before you take the step of establishing an enterprise and all the costs associated with that, and possibly running into debt, that you will have looked at a plan of action to bring in what you need. So, you know, boards and committees of social enterprises shouldn't run scared of recruiting an experienced skill set, even if that's for a certain period of time. Or bringing in, if needs be, if it can be done, it may be possible for you to put an advisory group in place as a subcommittee of the board, and possibly they're giving a certain contribution for a limited period of time. They know that's the case, so maybe that's where the shortfall comes in place. So I suppose, Chris, it'll depend very much on what the nature of the skills deficit is, and how much funding can be put in place to try and resolve it. But I do think that we need to have, I suppose, a budget in place that we're building and we need to therefore configure our operation so we can generate sufficient revenue possibly to recruit more skilled staff, even on a part-time basis. And I mean, that's something that's worth looking at. If COVID-19 has done anything, it's made us look at the choices work-wise that we've made. We're now starting to see people leaving cities because they know that they can work remotely. There's a whole drive in this area. So in fact, it may be possible for you to access really top quality skills that you need at a significantly lower cost, because you are a client now of somebody working remotely, and it might be worth looking at. So I would say, if you can, be a little bit creative around that, but don't leave a skill set unanswered, because it's going to come back and cause problems for you at some stage.
So just get people to lean into the idea that it's, you know, if it's third rail for you, there's probably a good reason you need some help with that. So it's something you're avoiding consistently. It's something that you probably need to figure out. I appreciate that. Again, just final questions, because we are coming up. By the way, Caroline, people are using their webinars to eat their lunch in the background as well, which is why we love doing things over lunchtime. So I sincerely hope everybody's well fed on us, because at least it's nice to be able to listen in to doing these things, which is why we like running them. You're a mind of information, and I'm sure there's 50 different ways that I could to go down this next path with you. But for people who are out there that are maybe setting up social enterprises versus those that are established, there's an awful lot of key learning points that are in here that are applicable to everybody, right? I mean, it's just because it's brand doesn't mean that you don't stop looking at these sort of things. So can you maybe speak to the difference between setting up something from scratch when nothing exists and you think it's a dream, versus it's here now and you have to deal with it? Is there something about the business model, the planning? Is there anything that changes there? Is there any advice that you have for people that are at any stage of development?
I suppose if you are approaching a social enterprise idea, you're full of enthusiasm and passion for it. And I suppose just be mindful you have to temper that with the reality of what can be done. So I think in those circumstances, you do need to go out and talk to people and do as much research as possible. You might think you've got the best idea in the world, but that's only because you don't realize that somebody else has thought of it and they're already implementing it somewhere else. So the one thing I would say to you when you're trying to get a social enterprise off the ground, talk to as many people as possible. Get out there, attend events, get involved, sign up for newsletters, but do your homework, because it'll be worth it to you in the long run. And it's amazing, you'll meet people who will open doors for you. That is the lovely thing about social enterprise in Ireland and the non-profit sector. We do help one another, and we're very enthusiastic to support people as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, though, in the case of an established social enterprise, it will depend, Chris, very much on how established they are. So if I go to that final point that I was referring to, if you've gotten the enterprise up and running, there's every chance that you're going to want more people now to get involved, possibly at board level, possibly coming involved as volunteers. And so if that is the case, you're going to think about how you are projecting your organization into that wider community. So let's assume that the demand for product and services there, whatever your social enterprise might be. Always remember that success follows success. So if you are seen to be a successful social enterprise, you will find it that little bit easier to convince potential volunteers and board members to join. And I think that for me, with some of the more established ones, that's an issue. And if we went back to the very first slide where we're talking about problem and solution, had you got it right to begin with, and had you actually identified the real problem that people were prepared to pay for a solution to, then you should start or be able to build a revenue through your traded income and other sources. So I sometimes find, in terms of the established social enterprise, the two big issues might be that they can't get sufficient volunteers or board members, and that they are having problems with operational cash flow. So that's again where I would bring it back to those key points.
I really appreciate that. I was reminded of the thing when you've got pre-startup, startup, and established social enterprise, and you've got that, what am I going to do? What am I doing? What have I done? Now, obviously, probably tone is probably really important. Maybe that's not how it was supposed to be, but you're not alone is the trick here. And that if you are feeling like you're coming up against issues, to know that it's not unique and that other people have come across it. Maybe the names of the people are unique and the particular numbers and things are involved, but the situation you find yourself in is probably not unique. And there is help there. I realize that you've got incredible help and supports. It's something that we're looking forward to partnering with. Hopefully announcements to come soon. If anybody wants information, please give us a trick with that. If you guys want to send us an email or put in any information in the chat box, please do that. For anybody else, please do remember that we do the Social Enterprise Twitter hours, and there's a whole host of other stuff that we're doing. We've got a number of emails that we're getting back to as well, and that's constantly ongoing. So everybody's situation, if you need help, there is help and support there. Caroline, thank you so much. We are delighted to be able to have you on the call, and we really appreciate it. And we're going to have you back maybe to talk about more specific things. I remember we were going to talk about board and all the rest of it. To anybody else who's been on the call, really appreciate you guys being here. It's obviously fantastic for us to have such an incredible community. Don't forget to check in tomorrow at our Social Enterprise Twitter hour, which starts at 9. And if you haven't been on Twitter before, hashtag SocialEntIRL, please do that. I'll leave some of the final words to yourself, Caroline. Thank you so much for being here. Is there any calls to action that you'd like for anybody to know?
All I would say to you is that what you're doing on the social enterprise space is amazing. You make a difference in people's lives. So even if you're having a bad day, just look at all of the positives and it'll get you over it.
Thank you so much. It has been a joy and a pleasure as always. Always great to chat to you, Caroline. For everybody else, really appreciate it. Check out next week. We don't have a check-in, but we do have some. Next week we don't have a check-in, but next week we do have some social enterprise Twitter hours that are still ongoing, and then the week after that then we're coming back with our webinar. So we're taking a slight break over the summer period. Just as a reminder, use the hashtag SocialEntIRL. We're deeply appreciate. Thank you so much, Caroline, and for coming along today. To everybody else, thank you so much, and soon.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
See ya. Thank you.